suddenly thought to yourself, if only I'd picked up a yellow seed. But there is still hope for you. So the servant said, where did the weeds come from? Well, it's something we all ask ourselves if we garden, I'm sure. Where do these weeds come from? Whenever we open a packet of seeds that we may buy from our local garden centre, we very often firstly look at the picture. The picture that displays exactly what should be produced after we have sown the seed and nurtured it and cared for it until perhaps in the midst of summer it will blossom and flourish. I was talking to a gentleman a couple of weeks ago who told me that back in about January and February time, he ordered online something he'd never ordered before. It was not just seeds, but it was a new invention, guaranteed to offer you the most splendid of crops. The idea was that the seeds had been placed into some form of mesh, some fibrous stuff had been placed within the mesh, and it was to enable you to literally take it out of the pack as it was delivered, make a space in your flower bed, lay the mesh with the seeds, lay it down, cover with soil, and basically forget about it. Whatever was in the mesh and in the fibers had the food and the nourishment and everything that was possibly needed to enable the flowers to flourish just as they looked on the pack. However, 2 weeks ago, he phoned the company up where they had bought these items and said, "Where are my flowers?" The gentleman on the other end, normally, I'm sure, if you made a complaint such as that, would ask you to go through exactly what the problem was. But instead of that, he simply said, "I assume you would like your money back, sir." Chap said to me, at that point I thought, no arguments, no quibbling. Why? And so he asked that same question. "You're very quick to offer me a refund. Why is that?" And with no hesitation, the gentleman said, "Well, in fact, we have had one or two other problems with this as well. So somewhere in the UK or beyond, there are patches of square, bare soil where people are still awaiting the flourish of their plants. And when that delivery was made, he, along with many others, would have put their faith and trust in those particular seeds, in relation to the flower or the vegetable that was clearly depicted on the packet. They would be planting, however, blind, like we all do if we open a packet of seeds. Now, I know there are certain seeds that you instantly recognize when you plant them. Things such as sunflower seeds. But there are some seeds which are so small and minute, as illustrated by the mustard seeds in the Gospels, so small that it almost looks like a speck of dust. Now, if anyone could produce a pretty picture on a packet. And they in turn could give that packet to you with a wonderful array of flowers on the front. And you would think, wow, this is what I'm going to have in a few months' time. And you could just be sprinkling your seed, and in a few months' time, you'd still have your bare patched soil. So very often when we plant our seeds, it is very much down to faith. We think that if we nurture them with due care and attention, do whatever we can to produce those fine seedlings, eventually we will have what we long for. God does everything he possibly can to supply us with good seed, offering us through the clear and often vivid imagery of his word and through the promises that he has made. Seeds come from one main initial plant, that of the plant of God's creation. Yes, the plant has a variety of images. It has a variety of leaves and flowers and grasses, but it all comes from what God has planted. In Genesis chapter 1 and in verse 9, we read, "Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it." It is a gift from God, a seed-bearing plant, something that will not just look beautiful, but will bear fruit, will nourish us and supply us with our need. God gave plants and trees so that we can turn those good seeds into an increase of true beauty, an increase of bountiful harvests that will feed the nations. He also plants the trees of peace and reconciliation, truly the most perfect of all seeds. So the servants in our gospel reading were convinced, as we are convinced, that our master would only sow good seed. So they questioned how it is that all these weeds had been produced in the field in such an excellent soil and carefully selected sowing. But before the master or the farmer could answer them, the servants themselves set out into the field to start pulling and turning over the weeds. Many of you will know that there is nothing that a weed enjoys more than being disturbed. If you ever have had some stinger nettles in your garden and you long to get rid of them, whatever you do, don't ever try and dig them up. Because the more you disturb, the more you tickle their fancy, and they will produce even more. But of course also, as we look at these seeds in our gospel, it also reminds us that there are many bad seeds, where in our world and in our disturbed and turbulent times, those weeds are never far away. And the more disturbed they become, the more fearful we become. This week we have seen the devastation within Gaza, and as I've already mentioned, the aftermath of the Malaysian aircraft disaster in the Ukraine. There will be those today uncovering evidence that could cause us much damage, because their intention is not to get to the bottom of what happened, but to cover up the events of that fateful day. God tells us here, it is the weeds come together, that it is no good simply pulling one apart, because it will only disturb the rest. Amazingly enough, the servants were told, do not go in and disturb, because you will only uproot those which are structured in goodness. The Common Lectionary is a set of readings that challenges us all, both those who listen and for those who preach. And I think it's one of the most important readings for this week, as we see the state of our world and its need. And so, to finish this particular sermon to you, I'm going to turn the clock back some 100 years. For against the odds, new life did also spring up in areas where the world was being torn apart. A story is told of the birth of a new human life that happened during the surprise gas attack in the French lines by the German army on the 22nd of April 1915. At exactly 5 o'clock that morning, a gas cloud was released, but at the same time, a Belgian woman gave birth to a baby boy in a cellar, in the dark and in great fear. The spring of 1915 was the first time that warm weather began to warm up the countryside after the cold winter of the war the winter from 1914 to 15. And in the region around Ypres in Belgium, the months of April and May 1915 were unusually warm. Farmers were therefore busy ploughing their fields, close up to the front lines, and new life was starting to grow against all the odds. One of the plants that began to grow in clusters on and around the battle zones was the red field or corn poppy. It is often to be found on the edges of fields where grain is grown. The field poppy is an annual plant which flowers each year between May and August. Its seeds are disseminated on the wind and can lie dormant in the ground for a long time. If the ground is disturbed in the early spring, the seeds will germinate and the poppy flowers will grow. This is what happened in parts of the front lines in Belgium and France. For in the greatest disturbances, in the fighting, in the gas explosions, in the ultimate fear of those who fought, the poppy seeds lying in the ground began to germinate and grow during the warm weather. The field poppy was also blooming in parts of the Turkish battlefields on the Gallipoli Peninsula. This flower is something where I know at least 3 gardens where I'm living locally have sprung up, and any other year would possibly just be chopped down and destroyed. But this year they seem to be lasting. It's almost as if people want to use that bad seed to remind them of peace and reconciliation. In a couple of weeks' time, on the 4th of August, we shall be commemorating those awful events that began in 1914. that one bad seed, once disturbed, now is a symbol of peace and reconciliation. So whether you hold today in your hand a yellow seed that is good, or a pink seed representing bad, remember that instead of being disturbed, come together, grow together, bring peace and reconciliation together, because the world in which we live is in such desperate need at this time.